I'm not entirely sure what you discussed last time with my colleague Daniel, but I'm sure it involved collection of data and observation, which is, I think, the starting point of any process when we're trying to visualize data or turn data into information in order for it to for it to become knowledge in the end. I want to talk about 2.5 theme, more or less. And it's basically the next steps that come after observations and collecting of data, which is organizing data, editing it, and then the next step is visualizing it. The last bit, which will be the last fifth of my presentation, will be about uncertainty and chaos, which we might actually default to anyway. So it's I hope that I can clear some of that up. The video that you're seeing here is actually a workshop in progress at the Basel School of Design, where Daniel and me were working with a group of students, and they had to collect or bring to the workshop each a bunch of objects, physical things. I think it were 50 objects per person. They each got a name tag and with some basic information on it. But because there were many students in this group, we had hundreds of objects in this gigantic space. And the workshop was about finding systems to organize all these different objects, which were, like little items like postage stamps and little pieces of stuff that you have in your pocket, to pieces of furniture and bicycle wheels and all kinds of different things. So to come up with a system to organize that can be quite challenging. And this is the room that we were working in, and we gave them colored tape to create layouts on the floor where the objects could be arranged. This here is a different workshop that we did at Ravensbourne College in London, where we didn't ask the students to bring objects, but actually organize themselves as a group. So there were about 70 students. How can you organize yourself as a group? And what we did is we had this idea, again with colored tape, to have them create kind of, like a gymnasium floor, where there's the different lines that are used in different games are superimposed on each other. There's the basketball court, but there's also the hockey court, or on top of each other. And he created these type of patterns so that if they were really observant, they could actually organize themselves automatically onto these different patterns. We created this stop motion of it. When we start a project, we do a lot of information design projects where we get from a client an enormous amount of data, usually statistical data or geographical data. This can be really intimidating, even like the database that you're working with now. If you're looking at it, you can where to start. What are the first steps that you can take easily. One thing that is really reassuring to us is basically that there's only 5 ways of organizing information, and you can always start with that. This is it's called the Latch System. It's developed by Richard Saul Wurman. He's one of the founders also of TED, the TED Talks. Basically what it says that Latch is an acronym for location, alphabet, time, category and hierarchy. And those are the 5 ways of organizing information. Any information set or data set fits into any of those categories. There's more than this system. There's other people who thought about this as well, longer times ago than Richard Saul Wurman did. But this is a thing that is really reassuring. If you're facing a lot of information, you have to deal with it, and you have to create a project out of it. You can start off with this. I want to show a couple of projects that we've been working on recently at the studio, and I'd like to show how that plays out, how the Latch system is always present. and hopefully we can also discuss some of its flaws. First project here is where we designed an important part to the Architectural Biennale in Rotterdam in 2014, where the theme of the Biennale was urban by nature, and it wanted to look at the city not so much as a physical space, you know, the buildings that we have and the parks and the roads and everything, but see it as a metabolism. So flows of things coming in and out of the city, you know, air, food, waste, water, what have you. And all of these themes, I think there were 9 themes or something in total. We created maps and diagrams to explore. There's also a book that we created, like for instance this one, just to take one example of all those of all that work. These are all the flows of energy in the Netherlands. On the left-hand side, you can see everything that is being produced here. Energy is that is being generated or imported. On the right-hand side, everything that is used or exported again. If you zoom in on that, you can see that the vast majority of the energy in the Netherlands is fossil fuel. It's oil. We don't burn all that here. It just is imported, mainly in the port of Rotterdam, and then exported again. We make a lot of money with that. Our economy is for a very important part based on fossil fuels, even so much that if you compare that to the stuff that we generate in a more sustainable way, it's just a tiny little drop in this huge sea of oil. And if you look at the center of that piece, this is a power station. There's fuel coming in and there's stuff coming out. The red band that you see going down there is hot water from the cooling towers. This is energy that we throw away, and it's 9 times as much as we generate in a sustainable way, which is, you know, the basic story of this graphic. But if you look at it as a whole and then see what the Latch, how this falls into the Latch system. Of course, first there's a categorization. On the one hand, there's the imports and the generation of energy. Then there's the usage and the export. Then there's another categorization in types. But there's also the amounts are there. So there's a hierarchy in it. So any graphic that you look at, you can immediately start to see these different modes of organizing information. Here are pages from the book that we created. I'm not going into all of these things in detail. I just wanted to show this. Well, one note on this, for instance, if you look at a map like this, I think that this had something to do with land use in the Netherlands. If you look at the way that this is drawn, of course, none of this is drawn by hand. We're not you know, taking all these little balls and then coloring them in by hand. So we write our own software to create this type of maps. But what is interesting is that every single dot does have a value behind it, which is heavily debated by experts. They disagree on everything. And it's one thing that we notice when working with data sets is that when you try to superimpose data sets on top of each other, they usually don't communicate very well. So, you know, if data is collected over time, the one data set is collected per week, where the other is collected per year. There might be gaps in it or something like that. Experts might actually disagree on data sets, and it's the challenge of information design to let all those voices sort of talk in one language convincingly. We already talked a little bit about bias earlier on, without being completely beside the truth. But you know, there's always I believe there's always a sort of a direction in the story you're telling. Another project here, which is not sustainable because we use this glow-in-the-dark ink on the cover, is about, we did it at around the same time. This is a book that we designed for Dirk Simons, and he's a landscape architect of H&S Landscape Architect. He was the curator of that Biennale, and he asked us to design this book with him. And it's about the energy transition in the Netherlands, or the energy transition that we need in the world, basically. And he wanted to investigate what effect that would have on the landscape. So he took this particular polder in the north of the Netherlands and said, what if we use this piece of land to generate energy for 1 million homes, 1 million households? What effect would it have on the landscape? Now, looking from these two images, there might actually not be anything going on there. But on the left-hand side, it's nuclear energy. There's actually, they photoshopped a little nuclear plant in there. You can see the fumes of the cooling tower. And they even photoshopped in a tiny mine where they would get what's the stuff called?
Uranium?
Uranium, exactly. Which, if you look at uranium mines, they're not tiny. Right? They're super big, but you only need a little bit. You need them only a little bit for 1 million households. On the right-hand side, there's something super sustainable. It's wind turbines, and they're on the. You can see the little white dots up there. So hardly any effect, at least from this height, hardly any effect on the landscape. Something that we feel is very dangerous. Nuclear power and wind power that from a sustainable perspective at least we like. But there's things that have huge impact on the landscape. Like on the left-hand side, you see biofuel. We actually need 9 times that entire piece of land to create enough biofuel for 1 million households. And on the right-hand side, it's tar sands. It's a oil-saturated type of sand. You need a super polluting chemical process to separate the sand from the oil again for you to use it again. This has a huge impact on the landscape. And we added a graphic to it because 1 million homes isn't the same thing across the globe. So the largest sphere here is 1 million homes in Los Angeles, which is a very open and widespread city. And the middle one is Istanbul, 1 million homes in Istanbul, and Mumbai, the smallest one, is 1 million homes there. This, of course, is geographical information, and I think it's interesting that when you have the ability, or there's the possibility, I mean, to put something on a map, it is always very handy because people can directly relate to a map. You understand that you're looking at a city, and I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure what it is actually in the image that you directly recognize this as a city, and it gives you an immediate sense of context, where that's completely different from a more abstract visualization, which you see on the right. It's even so complicated, I'm not even going to explain it, what's going on there. Last project that I want to show in this small series is a documentary that we worked on a few years ago, and this is definitely about time. So if we look at the Latch System, time is an important factor here, and it's interactive documentary that we created with Tegenlicht or Backlight. It's a documentary series on Dutch national television or public television, and it's about high-frequency trading, and we started the project in 2010, so a few years ago. When we had no idea what high-frequency trading was about, and we thought that stock trading, you know, when you're trading shares on a market, it's actually like this. This is Wall Street, and you have, you know, all the people wearing funny colored jackets, and they're shouting out their orders, and there's a lot of testosterone in the room, etc. But we quickly learned that Wall Street is actually a museum. No trades are going on there anymore. It's actually machines trading amongst themselves, and they decide whether to buy or sell stock, right? And it has enormous consequences on our world, because first of all, the machines that do this trading are immensely expensive. It's not like you can take any laptop or something and do that type of trading. So literally, a handful of companies only across the globe can actually afford to partake in this type of trading, and they hold the majority of trades, and their share of trading is increasing also. which is a frightening thought, I think. Another thing is that when we talk about emotions, maybe things like corruption, supposedly they don't really exist with this type of trading because it's just the algorithms that do the trading. You know, so when you hear things about uncertainty in the market or something like that, it's only partially true because the algorithm doesn't really care about any emotion or whatsoever. It's just trying to buy and sell stock as fast as it can. And that's immediately the last thing that is immensely important with this, is that the speed at which this happens is something that we cannot fathom anymore. When we did the project, I think it was 3,000 transactions a second. I think they doubled that by now. And in one transaction, there can be anything from 1 to 1 million shares being sold, right? So that's an enormous amount of shares are being sold per second or bought. We wanted to explain this in the documentary, but then there was this flash crash on the Dow Jones. So in 7 or 8 minutes, $800 billion got lost. It evaporated. We thought, this is our break. You know, we're gonna center our project about this. We worked together with Marije Meerman. She's a director, and she went to London and New York to talk to analysts and traders, etc. To do interviews, and we were given the data, and we designed the app. So I wanted to show a small clip.
Where are you on May 6, 2010?
Here working.
May 6, 2010. Yes, I was here.
One eye on the market, one eye on my own profits and losses, and then my ears and mouth doing whatever else they have to do.
It was the first really down day that we had in a while.
And the market's basically looks like it's going to go to hell that day.
It wasn't just minutes later, it was Armageddon. Oh my God.
Here you go, I've told it's 835. The Dow ticker, wow.
I feel like when the Dow gets really down 1,000 points, you're like, really?
87 even start trading, 86 even start trading, 85 even start trading, him up as all the
I saw that
way
panic, you know, and then I started watching CNN or one of those.
What we're seeing right now, I mean, I believe maybe unprecedented. You're not didn't talk about capitulation. Let's take a look at P&G.
They're gonna probably halt trading. We can't stop the selling.
So you've got the general picture, the big picture, although it's still over a very short time scale, and then you've got the detailed picture of the individual trades. See, there's a little bump there. That's almost the more natural scale, whereas even here at this level, it's something to be quite big. So there are some trades that are kind of normal, and then there's yes, funny, these big, you're right, these are really big, aren't they? But this one it starts off at 42 and it goes all the way down to 1 cent. Lord above, it's amazing. Oh my gosh, I turned away when that happened. So who is it selling Accenture at 5 cents?
It has to be a machine, right?
Yeah.
Eventually they're just rocketing back and forth between.
Yeah.
Only a machine can do those, right?
Any thoughts of what's going on here?
Steve Jobs didn't die. There's no reason for Apple to be falling to zero.
Right.
And so they start trading, and then, I mean, the back up in, 7.5 minutes or something, it was incredible. And that couldn't be people not reacting that quickly and not in that kind of volume.
Well, one key thing is how automated is all of this, all these trades?
And that's when the delay started, a few hundred milliseconds, and then a few seconds, and 5 seconds, and then 10 seconds. Some of them went all the way to 36 seconds.
So the delay in the data was 36 seconds.
Right, but the way that the timestamps occur is it hid the delay, so you couldn't see it. The Dow Jones, should have been here. The real price was here. The delay in the system caused it to appear like it was over here. So when people were seeing the Dow dropping, this was actually really where the market was at that moment in time.
We operate on this time scale where, where 5 minutes is pretty fast. You could go out for a cup of coffee, come back and find that you lost $1 billion. That would ruin your day, and yet for these computers, operating at microseconds, it makes no difference. So I think it's the circuit breakers is a case of sort of imposing our time scale on the computing time scale.
Could it happen again?
The same mechanism that caused it on May 6th is still there.
Yeah, it is actually happening again and again, that system, but just not at that magnitude. But someone is actually making money with that type of system. Anyway, one of the things that was important for us when we designed this and were working on this project was that many of the visualizations that we created were finished before the documentary was finished. And so Marij, the documentary maker, she could take our visualizations to experts and show it to them. What you have when you can download this as an app, this documentary. What happens is that you can navigate through these animations by yourself, but then have the expert comment at the same time. And it's a shame Lina had to leave already, because I think it's really important that you allow an audience when you're working on a project. You not only allow them to find the information by themselves and sort of piece together the story by themselves, but also to give them the expert, an expert opinion on what is going on, because information, as I said earlier, data is not information, but information is not knowledge. When you know Wikipedia is out there and all the information of the entire world is on Wikipedia, that still doesn't make you a wise person. You still have to digest all of that and then do something with it. Because otherwise, what is it? It's just meaningless information. It has no context. It's just that. And I think that this is something that is really important to notice when we were dealing with storytelling and the sharing of information, is that without being all too what's the word, paternal, guiding, you have to take someone by their hand and say, look, this is really important, pay attention to this, please, right? I think it is our responsibility, at least for us as designers, it is, I think. So I'll just go through this a bit more quickly. There's an interesting geographical component to this story too, because here is the New York Stock Exchange. This is actually the data center where all this trading happens. So not at Wall Street anymore, but it's here, and it's in Mahwah in New Jersey, a very small town. And you see the empty lot here. This is where Goldman Sachs built their data center. They want to be so close to the New York Stock Exchange because then the cable is a little bit shorter. And this gives them a minute advantage to over the other traders, which is crazy if you think about that. So here's a map of New York City, the red part being Manhattan, right in the tip of Manhattan is Wall Street, and this black area that is around it is called the data donut. This is where all the data centers are being built, and they do the trading. The outer parameter of that is limited by the speed of the fiber optic network. So if you go any further away, the speed of your data goes down so much that it's actually hurting your business. But the inner ring is there because they take into account the possibility of nuclear attack on New York City, and that would be the blast radius of a nuclear bomb, and you don't want your data center to be in there. So you have this area, this black area, this is where you should build your data center. But there's all kinds of things that limit you from that, like natural reserves or woodlands or slopes that are too steep where you cannot really build something, rivers that keep flooding. There's roads that are designated roads for the transportation of hazardous materials, and there might be an explosion danger there. The same goes for rail lines. There's flight paths of airplanes that go over this area to one of the 3 major airports around New York City, and you don't want your data center to be underneath any of these. Then there's nuclear power plants that you don't want to be too close to. We kind of messed that up a little bit. I mean, we said, well, the nuclear power plant has a similar blast radius as a nuclear bomb, so it's sort of which is not true, but anyway, it's a big gap where you cannot build. And then there's crime rates. You want to be in a safe neighborhood. What you end up with the darker areas that you see here, those are the pieces of land that are really good for building data centers, and ground prices are soaring in these places. There's dedicated real estate agents that buy and sell land in there. Another thing that is important when we're working with a lot of data is that sometimes there's just nothing to tell. Like we heard that this whole business with this crash occurred because of some bad trade that happened in a trading platform in Chicago. And so we created a visualization that was based on all the different trading platforms. So you see Boston, Cincinnati, etc. And every sphere that you see popping is one transaction. And we looked at this, pretty mesmerized. I thought, oh, it's really beautiful. We did a good job. This looks really good. And then after half an hour or so, we thought, yeah, but what the hell? Wait a minute, aren't we supposed to tell a story or something? And we just couldn't find any particular truth in our visualization. So we had to skip it, and that might sound like something super obvious, but it's sometimes really difficult to do. If you put a lot of work into something and created something that you think looks good, if it doesn't tell anything, it's also really meaningless. It's more like a screensaver, this thing. Anyway, so if we organize the data and thought about, so what are the most important factors in any data set by which we can reorganize it, then we start to visualize this. And from a graphic design point of view, this has is a little bit quirky. So I think that this video is a really nice analogy to what classical graphic design is. There's a top-down director that tells how everyone should behave exactly, no excuses, no room for error whatsoever, being super specific, and it creates really beautiful things. I mean, I really like that video. And but it's completely different from when you're dealing with data. There's something else that's going on there entirely. It's not all the classic characteristics of graphic design all of a sudden vanish. This image that you see right here might not look like the video before, but I think it's actually exactly the same thing. This is a movie scene from Spartacus by Stanley Kubrick, one of his earlier films. And there's been a battle, and everyone is dead. They're lying on the ground, and these are all extras, right? So these are people who are not actually extras, but sometimes they were real soldiers. And Kubrick was a maniac when it came to, he was a total control freak, so he gave out every extra in the film a number. And then he sat on one of those umpire chairs that you have at tennis matches, right, with a megaphone, and so he could shout out at each of these individuals, to be, remove the wristwatch, or be dead more convincingly, or whatever, bleed more, and then all the numbers. So he created this scene of chaos, but to perfection. And then all the numbers would be removed, and he could shoot the scene. And there's something really strange going on. I think because you don't really need to direct chaos, right? There's nothing. It happens by itself. I think that.
Right, now
I
the
can't
old
do this.
man with white hair and
Can you
glasses
just take
across the road.
Oh, hang on. I'll show this first. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. This is a beach scene in the Netherlands when on a really beautiful, one of our rare, really beautiful days, and this is also a type of chaos. You know, there's people organize themselves in a way, any way that they want, and yet certain patterns start to emerge here as well. So there's more parasols to this side. You know, people are lying on the beach, being protected by the sun. If you had a high resolution version of this image, you can see that all the kids are playing at the waterfront, etc. So there's a certain, people keep a type of an equal distance to each other. So there's a sort of an automated behavior inherent to people. That lets them create a pattern like this. I'll just skip that other video completely. And to talk a little bit more about how that applies to information design or the visualization of data, I think that this picture can be a good illustration. So again, this is a bunch of people behaving in a natural way. This church here is the Frauenkirche in Dresden, and it's been renovated. After years of neglect under communist regime. And this is the day of the grand opening of this renovated church, and people are queuing up to get into the church. And we've been looking at this picture a long time and thinking, you know, why is it such a perfect curve? You know, there's such a beautiful curve. There's really no reason why there's no physical reason why that should be. Why are people queuing up like that? You know, they could have taken any route basically on this open square. And what we're thinking is that what happens is that people who are standing here at the back of the line also want to see the front of the line. So everyone is sort of doing this. And then the person after that is doing that. And then the person after that is doing that. Right? So there's this creates a perfect curve. You can even tell a little bit like that it's like this because the statue is in the way here, and in the line, in their sideline, they just don't bother anymore, right? Because they can't see the end of the line anyway. This is also what happens in data visualization, I think, is that when you take a piece of data, it has a mind of its own, and it will sort of form all by itself. This is a project that has has certain traits like that. It's a book that we designed together with Nicholas de Monchaux. He's a professor at University of California in Berkeley. I'm not going into, there's not enough time to go into what type of research is behind it, but why I want to show it in this context is that he generated thousands of maps of 3 big American cities. So there's New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Each of these maps shows a very, very tiny fraction, maybe a street or a little square or something, that is neglected in these cities. No one is paying for its maintenance anymore, and they're basically left to ruin. He came up with a plan to revitalize those things, or those places. So they're like spots like this, where a billboard company bought a piece of land, fenced it off, placed a billboard on it next to a highway, and then did nothing else with it. He not only identified those spots, but he also knew what to do with them, because he combined many different data sets that would, you know, tell him what specific problems there were in the neighborhood that this piece of land was in. But to design this book with thousands of maps, we had to come up with a solution so that we could actually fit them in a way that would be, you know, the most important maps would be the biggest, and the less interesting maps would be smaller. So we came up with a system where we said, all right, the places that he wants to revitalize where it costs the least money is the places that are most interesting. And so we will place them the biggest, and then the most expensive spots will be the smallest. And this gave us a gliding scale of map sizes. They were all square, which was a benefit. But if you have images all of the same size, it's really easy to lay out them on pages. But when they're all different in size, this becomes quite inefficient very quickly. And so we came up with this algorithm that does that automatically, a bin packing algorithm that looks for the most efficient arrangement. And also, what we did is that we organized these little spots from west to east. So if you flip through the book, you actually have a sense of sort of scanning through the city. So here a design is generated almost automatically from certain data parts that we analyzed. This is what the pages look like. Sorry, it's an ongoing project. So we also created this exhibition at the Lisbon Triennale last summer. Now I want to be a bit technical about when we're creating a graphic representation, and this is after Yuri Engelhardt. He's a professor at the UvA, University of Amsterdam. Any graphic representation, he says, consists of graphic space. Where does everything happen? There's graphic objects in this graphic space, and then there's graphic relations. And graphic relations may be between the objects in the graphic space or objects to the space. This is really helpful when you're designing something. You can, at least for us, to be able to identify what it is that you're creating, on a more technical level, can be really helpful. But we can dive deeper into this, because what is graphic space? It can be an arbitrary spatial structure, like you see up there, like a network where everything is placed according to as the need arrives. Basically, there's metric space, which is in the middle. Also, a map could be a metric space, but not like the one on the bottom, because it's not geographically correct, because it's been extruded like that. So that's a distorted metric space. So there's 3 different spaces. And then there's different objects. There's information objects. So we had this graphic here with this nice curve. The curl is actually the bit of information. Then the box around it is a spatial referential object. But that's a 3D version, but there's also a 2D version. And legend objects that tell you a little bit about the quality of these things. And graphic relations also can be split up. So there's these are object-to-object relations. So there's overlapping and containment, linking between the lines, superimposing, which is different from overlapping, because overlapping creates a new bit of information, where superimposing just keeps the 2 bits of information separate, and a lineup where things are sort of in a sequence. And attribute-based relations, where you have sizes, for instance, color or shape. And then metric space. I'm sure I'm going to give you a link to these slides. There's a metric space that consists of more than one scale. So here you have it's dollars and shares. So there's 2 different axes with completely unrelated values. This is just a simple metric X, and an integral metric space, which is a geographical layout. And then distorted metric space. which like a subway map might qualify like that, where it's actually geographical representation of something, but not correct, or an exploded view from a drawing. Now, when we have all these different elements, right? All these this complete breakdown of how information graphics work. I think that there's one really important thing that is always missing from any of these discussions, and it's uncertainty and chaos. So it's my last little bit of my presentation. What I find super fascinating is that when you're not really sure about something, how do you express the fact that you're not really sure? And it completely ties in with the earlier discussion about objectivity. You might be super objective and honest about what you're telling, but maybe you just don't really know. Maybe there's no real proof of what you're saying. That doesn't mean that you're lying, but it's just, and how do you express that? I think that there's an interesting thing in map making is the relationship between what a map can do and what a written text can do. When you read in a news report, like the rebels are moving in from the northeast or something like that, you accept that as a sort of vague notion of what the rebels are doing. You understand that there's rebels and they're moving in from the north. But when you take a geographical map and you place an arrow on it, like the one there, you can all of a sudden start to say, oh really, is this where they're coming from? And point E, is that where they exactly are now? You can question this, and you will. You can start to think about the weight of the arrow and what that signifies. How do you get a map to do something as vague as saying, the rebels are moving in from the northeast? Just a general observation is really difficult to do. And I think the reason why it is really difficult to do might have something to do with this. I think Linda was almost starting to talk about something like this. This is from the book Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, which is, do you know this book?
Yeah,
Everyone knows
it last year.
Oh, you had to read it last year? Yeah, I think it's a total classic, and it has something to do with this: received and perceived information. Images, you don't need any formal training to understand. When you see the picture of a person, like Linda's picture of a woman, you understand that it's a woman. It's a woman, clear. But when there's a description of a woman, you first have to read and internalize the information, and then process it and do something with it and say, it's a woman. Maps look like pictures, but are more like written text. And this is where this confusion starts to exist. You expect to understand something in one glance, because it's a picture, but it functions as written text. And I think it's super important to be aware of that when you're creating your designs, but also when you're communicating about it. With a client, for instance, because often we get these remarks like, I don't understand it in 5 seconds, it's failed. And it's really, that can be super frustrating, because a visualization can hold much more information than a written page. You can fill a newspaper with a really complicated map that says more than you could say, written out on the same page. And no one expects to understand a written out page in one glance. You have to read it. It's accepted. It's also got something to do with this, where when you the level of abstraction that comes into play, where this is one person, these are many, and this is almost all. Something like that. Scott McCloud says. The same thing goes with the in the other way. You can have a very long description of the same person. Anyway, the last thing that I want to show. Am I still under 40 minutes? Not quite. Right. So it's about uncertainty. It's an image that we really like and relates to this. The story is, there was a young man who just had his driver's license, and he snorted a lot of cocaine and other various, uplifting substances, and he borrowed his dad's SUV, or basically he took it out of the porch or something and started driving. But because he was so out of his head, his driving skill wasn't up to par at all. So he got chased by the police quickly. He tried to escape the police, and he had this brilliant idea to drive into this cornfield to shake them off. So he entered the cornfield and drove around for half an hour, completely paranoid and sweating and making all these devious moves in the cornfield, trying to get rid of the police that were chasing him. Of course, he created a lot of damage, and he was so out of it that what he didn't notice was that the police was actually just waiting for him at the only exit of the field for him to just get it out of his system. And he was not being chased at all. When he finally exited the field, he drove his car into a ditch, into a total wreck, and he was arrested. And what we really like about it is that, to us, this is also a very, very nice data visualization of sorts, I would say, but then of paranoia or something, or the effects of cocaine on the brain or something like that. A way to show uncertainty and chaos, let's say. So, I feel like I really rushed that. That was it. Thanks.